Welcome to the Wednesday edition of the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Chris Peak from Panther-Lair Panther-Lair. I put the dash in the wrong spot. I mixed up my dash and my dot. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. You know that website. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, message boards where you can, interact for better or for worse with hundreds and thousands of your closest Pitt fan friends. Talk with other Pitt fans about everything going on in the world of Pitt sports right there at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. We put a lot of content on there every day on Panther-Lair.com. We have recruiting updates. We have, video breakdowns, team analysis, slideshows, articles, content, transcripts, all kinds of stuff. And then as sort of an extension of our coverage there at Panther-Lair.com, we have the Morning Pitt. Every morning, Monday through Friday, we put it right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We do other things here as well. Of course, we have the live Panther-Lair show every Wednesday night. That's tonight at 8:30 p.m., so make sure you tune in for that right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We have our post-game show, the Panther-Lair post-game, that we do after every game. And we'll do it on Saturday night after the North Carolina game. And you might be concerned. You might say, how am I supposed to know? What time are you going to start? It's an 8 o'clock game. Who knows how late that thing's going to go? And that's a great point. We didn't know what time the Louisville postgame show was going to start, given that was an 8 o'clock kick. And I thought, well, midnight is sort of my tentative working time. It ended up that game went quicker than I expected, so we started around 11:45. But I have a solution for you. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Turn on notifications, and you'll get an alert sent to your phone every time we go live. So tonight, for instance, if you forget about the live Panther-Lair show, you might say, it might be 8:30 or 8:35, and you're like, oh, darn it, I already missed it. That won't happen if you turn on notifications and get alerts sent to your phone, and then you'll know when we go live for the Panther-Lair show on Wednesday nights at 8:30. Same thing goes for the post-game show. If you're concerned that you're going to miss the post-game show, you don't want to miss the live chat and the discussion and conversation, subscribe. See that subscribe button down there. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Turn on the notifications, and you'll get an alert sent. It says, hey, it's time to talk about that game. Pitt, North Carolina. It's time to talk about that game on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like this video while you're here, subscribe to our YouTube channel while you're here, and all of that would be very, very helpful to us. We'd very much appreciate it. One thing we didn't get a chance to talk about yesterday on the Morning Pitt, it's kind of a recruiting angle. I really wanted to talk about the topic of benching quarterbacks yesterday, and I think we really dug into that conversation quite a bit. And I wanted to talk also yesterday about the Coastal Division and kind of look around the Coastal, look at the updates to the 2-deep, because there were some changes made there. But what we didn't get a chance to talk about was some recruiting news that came out Monday night. And that news was that Pitt lost a member of the recruiting class, Daidren Zipperer, a wide receiver from Florida, decommitted from Pitt. He announced it Monday night, dropped the recruiting class from 19 commitments down to 18 for that recruiting class of 2023. Those are guys who are in their senior years of high school right now. They will join their college teams in the fall, or next summer, I should say, or in some cases, this January to take part in spring camp. It's a bit lost of commitment. And the reaction was inevitable. The reaction was predictable. As soon as I saw that a wide receiver prospect had decommitted from Pitt, I knew exactly what people were going to say. And not without reason. But of course, the reaction was, this is what happens when you have a passing offense like Pitt has had this year. And I understand that. And I know that that's going to be the reaction, and I understood that would be the reaction, and I expected that to be the reaction. And you know what the truth is? There is probably some truth to that. Recruits do watch what's going on with their team. Maybe not as much as we expect them to, maybe not as much as we think they would, but they do pay some attention. And if you're a wide receiver and you've got options, and you look at a team that's struggling to get the ball to its receivers, if you look at a team that, as we've mentioned a few times, has a freshman All-American playing for it at wide receiver and a freshman All-American at tight end and a guy who caught 45 passes last year at wide receiver, and these guys are struggling to get the ball, then yeah, you might have a second thought about whether or not you want to play in that offense, particularly if you have other options. And Daidren Zipperer had some other options. A fact that he made plainly clear when like a week or two after announcing his commitment to Pitt, he took an official visit to Utah. That should have been the first tip-off. More than any concerns about the offense, that should have been the first tip-off that maybe Daidren Zipperer was not 100% on board. And that was sort of further complicated when we learned from various sources that Pitt didn't even really know he was taking that official visit to Utah. You add up those elements, committing and then taking an official visit and not even telling the school about it, you kind of see where that path is probably headed. And then you throw in the complicating factor that this offense does not look good for wide receivers right now. That this offense looks like it's, not looks like, this offense is struggling in the passing game right now. You throw that in on top of maybe a wandering eye that was already looking abroad and looking to the west. And you end up with the situation that we have here, which is Daidren Zipperer deciding to formally decommit. And now he's looking UCF in addition to Utah and BYU. I guess there's just a feeling he gets when he looks to the west. And maybe there's something appealing about living in the state of Utah for him. I think he's announced that he's going to make his next commitment on, I think, Halloween, maybe. So you would sort of say, well, this probably feels like he's going to end up at Utah, though I think he took an official visit to UCF over the summer. Ultimately, it's a recruit off the commitment list. And look, when you are fresh off a loss at Louisville, and that's your second loss in the last 3 games, and the other one was a loss to Georgia Tech, and you're sitting at 4-3, and you can't score more than 10 points in a game, and it sort of feels like this season is dangerously close to being a complete washout. And then a recruit decommits, it's easy to sort of extrapolate that to mean that everything truly is falling apart, that the world is coming apart at the seams, and that this recruiting class, they'll be lucky to sign 5 recruits in this class, let alone win 5 games this season. And there's probably a decent chance that the Cathedral of Learning itself will be imploded from the bottom. Maybe a bit of an exaggeration, but if you read the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, it's not that much of an exaggeration. I would say a few things. Yes, there's a bit of raining and pouring right now. There's no question about that. And yes, I think the performance of Pitt's offense this season did not help its case in holding on to Daidren Zipperer. I think he's a good wide receiver recruit, not a great or elite wide receiver recruit, but a good wide receiver recruit. He's someone that the coaching staff wanted. I think their pursuit might have picked up a little bit when they sensed that they were losing out on Hakeem Williams. I think they wanted Hakeem Williams to be the 4th receiver in this group, although he would certainly be the first receiver in the group. But I think they wanted him to be the guy who made it a 4-receiver class. And when that seemed unlikely, they maybe turned up their pursuit of Daidren Zipperer a little bit, although I think he was a priority, took an official visit in June. And so they were targeting him. There's no question about it that they wanted to get him into the class. They wanted 4 wide receiver recruits, and they wanted him to be one of them. And so I don't want to downplay the loss, although I don't think Zipperer was one of the top 4 or 5 recruits in the class. I think there are other guys that you would probably put higher on that list, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But I think, before we jump off too many bridges, I know we've already jumped off a few, but before we jump off too many bridges about losing Daidren Zipperer, I think a little historical precedent is worth considering, or a little historical context, I guess I would say, is worth considering, because there is some precedent here. And while Zipperer took his official visit in June and then committed and decommitted in the month of September, I think you do need to sort of remind yourself of what recruiting looks like in 2022. Now, there have always been decommitments. There have always been guys who back off their pledges or get pushed off their commitments. This is not new in recruiting. But what is new as of the last 4 years or so is recruits being able to take official visits in June. And we've talked a lot of times about official visits versus unofficial visits. If you need the brief primer, what it comes down to is who can pay for what. And on an unofficial visit, the recruit is pretty much on his own for travel, for room, for board, all that stuff. He has to pay his own money, or his family has to pay to take the visit. If you have to fly in, you have to drive, you have to get a hotel, all those things, it's on the recruit's dime. Official visits, on the contrary, are totally hosted by the school. The school pays for the plane ticket. They set up transportation. They set up the hotel room. All those things are taken care of by the football program. And so that's the big difference. And what ends up happening is these official visits, where you're allowed to be on campus for 48 hours, are a total red carpet affair, designed down to the most minute details to get you to love everything about your experience and want to, at the school, and want to be there for the next 4 or 5 or 3 or however many years you think you'll be in college. That's what they're designed to do. There's an old joke that nobody has ever hated an official visit. And, while there probably there is 1 or 2 examples out there of guys who were less than excited about their official visits, for the most part, that's pretty accurate. That the official visits are designed to impress, and impress is often what they do. And you want to use the official visit as your sort of gateway to a commitment. You want to give the recruit a perfect weekend, a perfect experience on campus, and then close it out by getting the commitment on Sunday or whenever the final day of the official visit is. And so that's what it's designed to be. And for the longest time, those things were happening somewhat during the fall of a recruit's senior year. You couldn't take an official visit until your senior year started, your senior year of high school. And there'd be some in the fall, but for the most part, they were happening in December and January, leading into that February signing day. And so you would have guys, they're into schools, they're flirting with schools. Maybe they commit, maybe they don't. But then they get to those official visits in December and January, and they get the in-home visits going. And that's when the real recruiting action takes place. That's when the real sales happens. That's when they close the deal and the recruits end up committing. 4 years ago, they added June official visits. They added an early signing period in December, and they added an early official visit period in the month of June. It's like April through June or something like that is the official visit period. Pitt and most schools have focused on the month of June, picking 2 or 3, sometimes 4 weekends out of the month to host recruits for official visits. And while it's happening in June, it still has the same sort of goal and the same design and the same execution. And I mean, to some extent for Pitt, it might even be better with them in June, because if you were going to be in Pittsburgh in the month of June versus being in Pittsburgh in the month of December or January, when do you think you might be inclined to have a better experience? Granted, the students aren't around in June like they are in early December or late January, but in terms of the weather, it doesn't get much better in Pittsburgh than the month of June. That's pretty much a highlight of the calendar year. And from the time these June official visits started 4 years ago, Pitt has pretty much cleaned up. I always call it the Father's Day Massacre back in June of 2018. That was a recruiting class of 2019. They got 11 commitments over the course of the month from official visits in June of 2019. The next year, they got 13 in 2020. They didn't have any official visits in the summer of 2000, or I guess I'm getting my recruiting years mixed up. The class of 2019 visited in June of 2018, and Pitt got 11 commitments out of that month of June 2018. They got 13 out of the month of June 2019. They didn't get any in the month of June 2020 because recruiting was shut down and it was recruiting dead period due to COVID. And then last year they got 8 commitments in the month of June, again from these official visits. And some guys would commit and announce it later. They're already off to a good start this year. They've gotten 14 commitments from the month of June, from June official visits. Guys who visited and either committed and announced on the spot, or committed and then announced a few months later, or what have you. And so Pitt has done a great job. They've cleaned up with these official visits and done, and gone into the season each of the past 4 years, save for the COVID year, with a giant chunk of their recruiting class already put together, already kind of closed out. But there's a downside. There's another edge to the sword, and you've got the upside of being able to get these recruits on campus during June when it's beautiful, and wrapping up a lot of your recruiting class before the end of the summer, and that's great. The problem is recruits can take 5 official visits. And if a recruit takes his first official visit and it's to Pitt and he loves it and he commits, that's great. Everybody's happy. But he's still got 4 more official visits he can take. And what we've seen a lot, and not just at Pitt, but across the country, is that recruits are taking more of those remaining official visits, but they're taking them in the fall, or they're taking them in December, right before signing day. And you remember what I said about how these official visits are designed and what they're put together to do. They're intended to be one 48-hour, hard sell. And not necessarily a pressure sale, but a hard sell of everything the university and the football program have to offer. And so you run into this situation where, say you've got recruits who committed to you from the state of Florida, right? You pay for them to come up in June. If you're Pitt, you pay for them to come up in June. You pay the plane ticket and the hotel, all these things. It's a considerable expense, not inexpensive. And it's great, and they commit to you, and it's awesome, and everything's in great shape. And then it gets to be like the fall or early December, and the coaches can go down and visit the recruits in person so they can keep that face-to-face contact and that relationship growing. But for some of these guys, some of these recruits, they're not able to, they might not have the means to get back on campus to fly to Pittsburgh again and stay in another hotel. But they can go to Ole Miss. They can go to North Carolina. They can go to Florida State. They can go to Auburn. They can go to all these other schools because other schools can bring them in on an official visit. You can only take one official visit to each school. You get 5 total, but you can't visit a school more than once on an official visit. So Pat Narduzzi's got to kind of sit back and watch as some of his commits take official visits to other schools. And again, it's not entirely new. This has happened in the past, that you might have a commitment from a guy and then he takes visits to other schools. But what is new is you might have already used your official visit in June and you don't have that opportunity to bring them back up and kind of reestablish that connection and remind them of why they picked Pitt in the first place. And so all of this is a really long-winded way of getting around to the point that while these June official visits have created a lot of commitments, there's been decommitments from that group every year. Every year since these June official visits started, Pitt has lost at least a few of the guys who committed in the month of June during their official visits. So you go back to that class of 2019, right? Which was June of 2018, and Pitt got 11 commitments from kids who came and took official visits in June, and while they were there, they committed to Pitt. 3 of those guys ended up decommitting. Travis Kuntz, the tight end, you might remember him, the junior college tight end. Caudry Jackson, who was a guy who canceled other official visits because he wanted to commit to Pitt. He ended up going to North Carolina. Travis Kuntz ended up going to Texas Tech. And then Brandon Mack, the defensive end, ended up going to Ole Miss. Those guys committed to Pitt, but then took later official visits and ended up decommitting and going somewhere else. The next year's class, Pitt got 13 commitments. They only signed 10 of those guys. 2 of them decommitted sort of by choice. One was Henry Parrish, the running back who went to Ole Miss and is now at Miami. The other was T. Denson, a defensive back who went to Kansas State. Now he's at Purdue. And then the third was Timothy Brown, who you might remember, a defensive tackle who got into some pretty serious trouble with the law in the midst of his senior season, and Pitt really had no choice. I mean, they couldn't bring him in under those circumstances. He didn't end up anywhere else. He's actually now a redshirt freshman at Independence Community College, so a little bit old for a redshirt freshman, maybe a year behind of where he would normally be. Instead of being his 3rd year of college, he's in his 2nd year of college, but maybe trying to make a comeback. We'll get back to him in a second. Like I say, they didn't get any June official visits in the class of 2021 because that was June of 2020 when they couldn't have any visits at all. But the next year, last year's class, the class of 2022, guys who are freshmen right now, visited last June. It was a smaller class overall, and they only got 8 commitments out of the month of June. For 8 commitments from official visits in the month of June, and they lost 2 of those guys. Jacavian Nonar, who the offensive lineman who ended up going to Maryland, and Camden Brown, the wide receiver, the 4-star guy who went to Auburn. And now, you're looking ahead here at this year, and Pitt has gotten 14 commitments from their June official visits, from guys who committed in June. We're not even counting Daidren Zipperer. He took an official visit in June, but didn't commit then. He committed later, like into September. So we could count him. We could say they got 15 commitments from their official visits in June, and they've lost 1 so far. Or we could say they have 14 and no decommitments yet. But either way, I mean, there's going to be a couple. And it's not an indictment on the coaching staff. It's not a reflection of the current season. It's just the reality that when you take that many commitments from guys on their official visits in June, it's almost inevitable that at least a couple are going to take official visits to other schools between now and signing day and probably see something that they really like and find out, hey, I really like it here in East Lansing, or hey, I really like it here in, Lubbock, or hey, I really like it here in Piscataway. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost inevitable that you're going to have that happen. It's And like I say, it's not necessarily a reflection on the kids. It's not a reflection on the coaches. It's just what the process is right now. And I think you almost have to account for that. If you're the coaching staff, if you're the Pitt coaching staff, and you had 4 commitments from wide receivers at one point, you had, before the end of September, you've got 4 commitments from wide receivers. If you really want to sign 4 wide receivers in this class, then you need to have some other guys lined up. Now, not necessarily you have this list of guys that you can just, one of them will commit as soon as you call, but you have to keep, a few lines in the water. You know what I mean? You have to keep a few, what's the saying, irons in the fire or something like that. Irons in the fire. You have to keep in contact with other guys. Even if you don't have room for them now, you might end up having room for them in a week or in a month or in December. And that's part of how the recruiting process just works now. It's just part of it. And so Daidren Zipperer, first decommitment from this class, at least out of those June official visits. I don't think they had anybody else who committed and then decommitted, did they? Somebody that comes to mind. I'm sure if someone else did, you guys will let me know. But do it in the comments here on the video. You can post a comment and remind me of someone I'm absolutely forgetting about. As far as those guys who decommitted, though, there have been 8 from those classes, not counting Tim Brown. Oh, no, actually, we'll count Tim Brown because there have been 8 guys who committed from their June official visits and then ended up not signing with Pitt since 2018, since the class of 2019. Whatever happened to those guys? Let's take a quick trip down memory lane here. Travis Kuntz, like I mentioned him, junior college tight end. Remember, he went to Texas Tech because he thought he would have to block too much at Pitt and he wanted to catch passes. He played 3 seasons for the Red Raiders, caught 45 passes for 647 yards and 5 touchdowns. Not bad. Not exactly a high volume approach, but 45 catches over 3 years. I think he had his best season this past year when he was a super senior, used his COVID year to play an extra year, but 45 for 647 and 5 touchdowns. Kadri Jackson, kid from Orlando who worked out at Pitt's camp and then earned his offer there and then got invited back for an official visit, which led to his commitment. He ended up flipping to North Carolina late in the recruiting process, played 2 years in Chapel Hill, played in 25 games, mostly on special teams, and made 17 tackles. He is now at Georgia Southern for the last 2 seasons. Last year and this year, he has played in 14 games. He has 58 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks. He's an outside linebacker, probably would fit pretty well in this defense. I imagine he would probably have some success. But when he decommitted late in the process, Pitt sort of scrambled and took a flyer on some random kid from Syracuse who was playing like a post-grad year in New Jersey. This outside linebacker with this weird name or strange name, Servassier Dennis. So the replacement for Kadri Jackson was Servassier Dennis. That probably worked out. And then Brandon Mack, defensive end, who I think people were really excited about when he committed. He ended up flipping to Ole Miss. He redshirted in 2019, played in 5 games in 2020, kind of as an outside linebacker. I think it's in like a 3-4 sort of scheme. He was hurt and missed all of last season. This year he's played in 6 games and he has 1 tackle. Moving ahead to the 2020 recruiting class, Henry Parrish. You'll recall he was committed over the summer. We've talked about him a few times when we take a look around the Coastal. He was committed over the summer of 2019 as part of the 2020 class. Pitt had 2 running backs committed that summer, Henry Parrish and Israel Abanikanda. By the end of the summer, it was pretty clear Parrish was going to look around. He had huge games to start the season and ended up decommitting. I forget if he committed it right away to Ole Miss or ended up putting it off, but he ended up at Ole Miss, played 2 seasons, carried the ball 161 times for 816 yards and 5 touchdowns over 2 seasons, averaged 5.1 yards per carry. Then he transferred to Miami. He's playing there this year. He's got 89 carries, 441 yards, and 4 scores, 5 yards per carry. I think Abanikanda has been the better back in college. He's obviously produced more this season when he's the ACC's leading running back, but it would be nice to have both of those guys on the roster. T. Denson was the other one from that class who ended up decommitting, a defensive back. He went to Kansas State, played 2 seasons there, played 19 games, made 1 start at the end of his freshman season, but just seemed to come off the bench as a sophomore. He made 1 interception. He transferred to Purdue, where he has not played this season. He had surgery for something in February. I don't know if that's led him to not be on the field this year, but he's on Purdue's roster. So I don't know what's really happening there. And then Tim Brown was the other guy in that class, a defensive tackle. Like I said, got into some legal trouble during his senior season. And Pitt couldn't sign him. Nobody signed him. Seems like he got out from under whatever legal issues he was facing. And he's now at Independence Community College. He's a redshirt freshman. He's played in 7 games this season. He's got 24 tackles and 4 sacks. So as a defensive tackle, he's playing well. I don't know if it's a guy that Pitt would take another look at down the road. I'm sure he's going to be looking for an opportunity, finishing up his second year at Independence. And then in last year's class, you had Jacavian Nonar, who I mentioned. He's at Maryland now, offensive line. He was a big sort of athletic, kind of a project as an offensive tackle, but someone with all the physical skills that you would take a chance on him. He's played in 4 games as a true freshman at Maryland, all on special teams, no snaps on offense, but he's played in 4 games so far. We'll see if they play him in 1 more game and use his red shirt, or if they burn his red shirt on special teams, or if he sits on the bench the rest of the season. And then Camden Brown, you'll recall his recruitment. He committed over the summer, stayed committed through the fall, but was clearly sort of flirting with Florida State and Auburn, ends up signing with Auburn. So far this season, he has caught 3 passes for 26 yards and 1 touchdown. He's played in every game. Played in 7 games for Auburn on offense. He had 49 snaps against LSU. That was his, I guess that was his most playing time this season. Caught an 18-yard touchdown pass in that game. And then he played 31 snaps against Mizzou, caught 2 passes for 8 yards. So he's getting on the field a lot. Not necessarily producing a whole lot on offense, but he's getting on the field. I think that's probably one you would like to have. He's a talented player, a 4-star prospect, and would look pretty good joining this receiving core. Although, as we've said, and I know how long we've been talking here already today. We're not going to go down this road again, but as we've said, I don't think talent is the issue in Pitt's receiving core or Pitt's offense as a whole right now. But we'll have plenty of time to talk about that through the rest of the week. We'll get into, we got a couple more morning pits for you this week. We'll talk about the defense. We'll talk about some more offensive things, and then get you ready for Pitt, North Carolina on Saturday night. Can Pitt score enough to beat Carolina the way they've played last week and against Georgia Tech? The answer would be no. Do they have more in the tank than what they've shown or what they've been able to accomplish thus far? I think so. But 7 games in, I don't know how much you can operate on faith. So we'll see what they're able to do. But we have a lot to talk about over the next couple days to get you ready for that. Don't forget, tonight, the Panther-Lair show live at 8:30 p.m. on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. If you don't know what that is, I sit down, I start talking. It's kind of like this, except it's happening live. And we've got the chat screen right over, I think it's on that side of the screen. And you post your comments and questions, and we interact. We go back and forth. You post a comment, I read it and react to it. You post a question, I answer it to the best of my ability. It's almost like a talk show, except instead of you calling in and us listening to your voice, I just read your comments and we go from there. It's a lot of fun. We have a good time with it every week on the Panther-Lair show. We go for about an hour or so just talking about whatever's going on in the world of Pitt sports. So I hope you can tune in. It's a lot of fun. 8:30 p.m. tonight, and of course we'll be live after the North Carolina game on Saturday night, somewhere around midnight. Hopefully earlier, like it was for the Louisville game, but maybe not. Maybe later. We'll see. This is probably going to be a lot of passing in this game, and possibly a lot of incomplete passes, stopping the clock and extending it well into the evening and the early morning hours. Either way, thanks for checking out today's Morning Pit. We got a lot of focus on recruiting. We'll get back to the team and basketball. I want to talk a little hoops later this week, so we got a lot to discuss over the next couple of days. But hope you have a great week so far. We made it to the middle of the week. Hope it goes well for you. And we will talk to you again tomorrow morning for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.